Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this behind-the-scenes look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. Here we talk to the key players at PETA and the movement and ask them how animal rights change their lives and how they stay motivated to make the world a better place for animals. This episode, the cruel and unusual animal research at Texas A&M, and why the research at A&M in the name of science and medical research is a waste of tax dollars and should be stopped. It's research that's cruel and useless.
It doesn't translate to human beings. And so they're publishing a lot of papers. They're securing a lot of grants. It looks like they're doing something. But when you take a clear-eyed view of what's going on, you have nothing for human patients. We have not gone one baby step forward in making lives better for the human patients who suffer with human muscular dystrophy.
Dr. Alka Chandna on the research using dogs at Texas A&M University. Chandna is Chief of Laboratory Case Management, Laboratory Investigations Department at PETA, and talks about how, in order to get the research, the university must first breed the dogs whose only purpose is to suffer. There's a reason people have responded to PETA's protest of the research during the NCAA basketball tournament, where Texas A&M was part of March Madness. The team lost, but the madness continues in the labs at Texas A&M. Alka explains on the PETA Podcast. But first, I want to thank you for joining us as we embark on making podcast land a better place for animals as well. If you missed any of our past episodes, go to the links on the podcast page at PETA.org. Naturally, PETA President and co-founder Ingrid Newkirk kicked off with Episode 1. Listen to what she has to say about no-kill shelters and a variety of other topics. And in the future, Ingrid will join us again with our special Ask Ingrid segments. Send in your questions to PETA.org. But do check out the links on PETA.org or wherever you listen to podcasts. Incidentally, as the horse racing season starts up in earnest, PETA is doing what it can to stop the most heinous abuses in the so-called sport. The drugging of unfit horses who are then sent cruelly on to the races. Find out what PETA is doing to stop that, and check out all our previous episodes on iTunes. And because we're really just beginning, when you're on iTunes, please rate and review. It helps spread the word that PETA has a podcast talking about the issues you care about. And now on to Texas A&M. This week, PETA's Alka Chandna went to the campus to speak to students about cruel research being done in their name. In my conversation with Chandna, she explains the perversion of science and how Texas A&M treats dogs.
Texas A&M University actually breeds dogs. They deliberately breed dogs who are predisposed to have a genetic condition which is similar to human muscular dystrophy. So these are dogs who are going to have a painful, progressively deteriorating condition where they have difficulty walking, running is out of the question. They have difficulty eating, swallowing, and even breathing. So these are dogs whose lives are really characterized by unmitigated pain and suffering from birth to death. Texas A&M has a colony of dogs who are bred to suffer in this manner.
And these experiments, how did they come to your attention?
We were given some video footage from a university insider. And if people watch the video, which they can do at PETA.org, they will see very thin dogs who are confined to small and barren steel enclosures. And these enclosures have slatted metal flooring. So you can see the dogs who are weak, that are just, and these dogs are having difficulty as they precariously make their way across this tiny enclosure. They have difficulty eating, and because they suffer from this disease of muscular degeneration, their jaws weaken, their tongues become enlarged. And as I said before, swallowing is difficult for them, and they can very easily bring in food through the wrong tube and could then choke, get pneumonia, and suffer terribly and die. And so they're fed a thin gruel and are calorically really deprived, not intentionally, but because that's the condition of their disease. The agony of the dogs is absolutely palpable to anybody who watches the video. And when we received the video, we started doing our due diligence to understand more about what was going on.
It's pretty disturbing, and it identifies the experimenter by name Joe Cornegay, who has been doing this for nearly 40 years. And the university says, despite what the appearances are, the dogs are well taken care of. What have you found to be true?
Well, as a first step, we would invite your listeners to watch the video for themselves and make their own determination on how well these dogs are cared for. We've also heard from in some communications that the university officials are saying that the people who care for the dogs love the dogs, to which I think I'm glad they don't love me, because it's absolutely transparent that these dogs are deprived of a life worth living, of everything that they would value. They are confined in these enclosures, which are barren. The very fact of their existence is pain and misery. And then you add to that the fact that you look at the cages in the video, and these dogs don't even have a blanket. They don't have a resting board. They're very, very thin to the point where their bones are protruding. And if you've ever had a condition like that, where maybe you were feeling particular pain in an area, you know that you don't like to sit on that portion of your body, that it would hurt a lot. And these dogs don't even have some cushioning to help mitigate the pain somewhat. These small, tiny, almost negligible considerations are deprived of them. The university can't even be bothered to do these small things that might ameliorate the suffering of the dogs a little bit.
But the university does say, though, that the dogs, they say they're well taken care of, but that if they're not, well, they were already suffering from the disease, and the university is just trying to find a cure for what's ailing them.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. It's so odd that the university would say that these dogs are already suffering. The dogs didn't exist except for the fact of the university's deliberate breeding program, where artificial insemination is used and genetic tinkering, in the sense of selectively breeding dogs so that they will have muscular dystrophy, or I should say canine muscular dystrophy. So the dogs wouldn't exist were it not for the university's breeding program. So I think it's a bit disingenuous when the university says that these dogs are already afflicted. The implication of that is that these dogs are just somehow showing up on the university's doorstep, and the university is acting like Mother Teresa to swoop in and help the dogs. But this is not the case. It's the reverse. Nobody with the smallest amount of compassion would deliberately bring beings into the world in order for those beings to be sick, so that they could then be manipulated, to try to get some information out of them, to use them for data. And that's exactly what the university is doing. So we really question that. Moreover, the claims that they're trying to help anybody are questionable also, in the sense that if we review the literature, which PETA has done with the help of internal and external scientists and medical doctors, if you review the data, it becomes clear that more than 3 decades of these experiments and this breeding have failed to produce even one cure for muscular dystrophy, or even a treatment that would reverse the debilitating impacts of the disease in human patients.
Oh, wait a minute. Now, you're saying that they've been doing these same experiments for over 3 decades, so they have data and it's produced nothing? They have no results?
That's exactly right. They have no results that have helped any human patients. And to be clear, Joe Cornegay, the lead experimenter at Texas A&M University, he's been doing these experiments for more than 30 years. And he's only been at A&M since about 2012. So for the last 6 years. We hired a neuroscientist who actually herself has a background in animal experimentation, Dr. Emily Guillermo, and she did a very careful and thorough review of Cornegay's body of work, his published papers and book chapters that he's written and so on, to really get a handle on what this guy has been doing. And we took that together with some analysis done by Dr. Ingrid Taylor, who is a veterinarian who works for PETA. And she looked at the veterinary impacts on the dogs of the breeding and the experiments. And together with some external experts, medical doctors, neurologists, and so on, we looked at what these experiments have offered. And, what they do is they tinker. They'll, look at the genetic impacts of something and, then they produce these dogs and talk about how the dogs were bred and what they have to do, how many dogs have to be bred, how many carrier dogs who carry the defective gene but don't actually manifest the disease physically, how many of those you have to have for the breeding program. They talk about all of this stuff. And then they'll talk about different therapies that they've tried in the dogs. And some of these therapies have worked in the dogs. And then you try to bring them to the human bedside and they don't work. And this is happening over and over again. And they might get some insights into what the situation is with dogs, how the cellular and molecular mechanisms are working and how these different aspects in the biology work together. It doesn't translate to human beings. And so they're publishing a lot of papers. They're securing a lot of grants. It looks like they're doing something. But when you take a clear-eyed view of what's going on, you have nothing for human patients. We have not gone one baby step forward in making lives better for the human patients who suffer with human muscular dystrophy.
But this is essentially what all animal experimentation is. If there's no correlation between the, what happens to the, to one species as in how it is relevant or how it pertains to humans, aren't we just wasting our time and wasting dollars, millions of dollars with these experiments? Not to mention the cruelty to the dogs.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, Emil. And, this is the stranglehold that we find ourselves in when we talk about experiments on animals that are intended to help human beings. Because the translation doesn't exist, we are, as you say, throwing good money after bad. It's also this incredible wastage of brain power, laboratory space, university space, taxpayer dollars. And as you point out, most poignantly, the price is paid by the animals who are made to suffer egregiously in laboratories. The difficulty that we're seeing is that the paradigm is so solidly anchored in the use of animals in experimentation. That's been the history. And you look at people like Joe Cornegay, who's he's about my age, in his, mid to late 50s. You look at people like that, they were trained in animal experimentation. That's what they've done, and they keep doing it. And the people who review grant applications, they are all animal experimenters. The people who sit on the oversight committees, the animal experimentation oversight committees, they're animal experimenters. The whole system is dominated by these people who have a vested interest in seeing this process continue, that this mode of investigation continue. So this is what we're up against. But I don't want to suggest that it's all negative, because we're seeing a real sea change in this whole system. And we're seeing challenges to the paradigm where, because of devastating data like what we're seeing with Cornegay's experiments at Texas A&M, these dog experiments to study human muscular dystrophy and the lack of benefits gleaned from those experiments, because of things like this and larger metadata about the failure to translate that you referenced, we are seeing changes in policy, changes in requirements from government agencies, even the National Institutes of Health here in the United States, which is the world's largest funder of biomedical experimentation on animals. Even they are starting to shift. There's a lot of reason for optimism, even as we deal with absolutely frustrating and infuriating situations like what we see at Texas A&M.
Yeah, but it seems to me that there's this built-in bias here. You're talking about these experimenters. I mean, people might listen to this and say, well, PETA has their own bias when they look at these experiments, but it's your bias versus the huge built-in bias by the scientific community. And it just seems to me, and I've always felt this, that when you talk about people on the grant cycle or on the grant mill, it's almost like a welfare system for scientists, where the universities get the federal funding, and under the guise of science, under the guise of research, the government has funded these careers, and they don't know how to do anything else.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think there are a few things to say there. Number one, I 100% agree with you. It's a government gravy train for these experimenters. They don't know how to do anything else. And I think also it's very difficult for them to have a clear-eyed view of what they've done and what contributions they have or really have not made. And I have some sympathy for that. If I had been working for 35 years and they're seeing the experiments, they know the agony they're causing to these animals. Ostensibly, they could even have dogs at home whom they love, and yet they see the pain and misery they're inflicting on these other animals. If I had been doing that for 35 years and somebody was saying to me, hey, where's the cure? Where's even a treatment that will reverse the debilitating symptoms of muscular dystrophy in humans? I would have a difficult time looking in the mirror at myself if I were to really entertain those ideas. So I get that.
Yeah, but at some point, it really boils down to self-interest, right? I mean, I'm the experimenter. I'm the dominant one. Poor dogs, but I have this higher calling, science, and I'm going to get to the bottom of this no matter what. I mean, it seems like that's sort of how they rationalize this. So it's irrational, but it's their way of rationalizing.
Yeah, I agree with you, Emil. And I think there's a lot of arrogance. These are people who, in spite of what they're doing in laboratories, which of course most of the population isn't even aware that that's going on, and don't necessarily know that the people who are their neighbors, who maybe go to a place of worship where they go, that these are people who are doing these things to vulnerable animals in laboratories. That there is an arrogance that they know what they're doing, that, they have these publications, that they've secured these grants, but they don't step away from all of that. They're too immersed in the system, that has, given them promotions and tenure, really good salary, respect in the community. It's hard to pull them out of that so that they can have an honest perspective on what they've been doing. But I also want to say one more thing, which is that, yes, of course, PETA has a perspective on all of this. Of course, we very fundamentally, and this is something that we say without apology, that fundamentally we say that it's wrong to take an animal out of his or her natural environment, put them in a laboratory or breed them into existence, and then visit upon them every suffering imaginable, and, a whole laundry list of sufferings I would never have imagined could be done. And we say that that is wrong, because what you're dealing with are beings who are vulnerable. They feel pain, they suffer. And that by itself is enough to say, this is not something we should be doing. That is what a bully does. A bully takes advantage of weaker beings or beings who can't defend themselves.
Not a scientist?
It should not be a scientist. Absolutely not. In fact, sometimes I think that, this field that I work in, and many of us at PETA work in, and other people as well, of course, this focus on the use of animals in experimentation. Here you're talking about quote unquote scientists. These are people who are supposed to understand biology, are supposed to understand the species. And they say that they use animals because animals are like us. They have the same biological system, circulatory system, neurological system, and so on. They have these biological systems, and they say we can use the animals because they can give us information about human beings. But then they ignore the fact that these are animals like us, who feel pain, who suffer, who have families, who are social beings, who have their networks, who have interests, and a biography. These things that should give us pause and say their interests matter and we should leave them alone. And so I often think that this area, animal experimentation, is being carried out. Animal experiments are being carried out by people who purportedly understand these issues, understand that animals, are part of the chain of being. They are like us. And, so it's really disappointing that people who put on their lab coats and wear the hat of scientist, fail to recognize these most fundamental things.
Well, it sounds like, and when you look at the video, it looks sadistic. It looks sick. It looks like these experimenters are really kind of maybe a step below Dr. Frankenstein, but certainly are they blind to that?
I think so. I think they become entrenched in the system. And this is something that we see, when we think about the whole enterprise of animal experimentation, how people get into animal experimentation, career paths and this sort of thing. I mean, I'm ashamed to admit that I dissected animals when I was a high school student. And this is a while ago. It was like the late 1970s. And PETA didn't exist back then. And although we had a dog at home who I loved, more than life, I didn't really make the connections. And I also wasn't the sort of student who would say, I'm not going to do this. But you think about something like that, teaching high school students to dissect and then maybe using live animals in nutrition experiments or observational experiments. All of these things slowly start a desensitization process. First you're using an animal who's already been killed and you see this animal on a styrofoam plate and you think, okay, animals are a means to an end. I'm going to get an education. Then you're manipulating live animals in these classroom laboratories. And then it becomes more and more invasive. That's the path that these young biomedical students take. And we read these reports, and in fact, we know these people, and some of them now work for PETA, in our laboratory investigations department, people who were essentially bullied into using animals, who expressed especially discomfort, when they learned that the science didn't hold up, that there were very, serious problems with the quote unquote modeling that they were doing to try to understand, human, outcomes, and expressed this discomfort and expressed, opposition, but were really shut down. This is what we're seeing, people. So the people who, have enough of a backbone to say, wait a second, this is wrong. well, they don't stay in the system. It's the people who tend to think, okay, I'm going to, go along to get along. I keep my head down, do the work, and,
Be a good scientist, huh?
Exactly.
Alka, what do you want Texas A&M to do? What's it going to take to get all of their scientists to be enlightened and to say, this isn't right. We have to end this campaign.
Well, I think it's very simple. We want the breeding of dogs to stop. We want the experiments to end. And any dogs who are remaining in the colony, and we believe there are about 90 dogs there right now, they need to be adopted out so that they can live out their remaining years in the comfort of a family who loves them. This is going to be the solution that will get PETA off of the university's back. We will stop dogging them at all of their events, including basketball games and anywhere the president and other administration folks give talks or are invited. We'll get, that action will get us off their backs. It will obviously ensure humane treatment of the dogs going forward who are currently in the colony. And it will also ensure that the resources that are currently being poured into these horrible dog experiments can be refocused so that they go to research methodologies that actually help human beings.
Now, you're going to be on campus yourself this week. What are you going to be doing, and what are you going to be saying to the university and to its students and to its faculty members?
My colleague, Dr. Emily Trunnell, and I will be headed down to College Station, Texas. We will be giving a talk to the students and showing actually a poster that Emily presented at a World Congress on alternatives to the use of animals in Seattle, Washington, a little earlier. We'll be presenting that and speaking with the students about our campaign, showing the evidence that we have of the university's breeding. The university has been, as we discussed earlier, the university has been misrepresenting its role in the existence of these dogs, and we really hope to set that whole mythology to rest by showing all of the documentation that we have, which is probably going to be most of the luggage that I take down. There are these files and files that we have. We'll also, we're hoping to meet with various administrative officials while we're there. And again, to say that we would like to see a resolution to this campaign where the university finally, for once, does the right thing.
Are you going to be meeting with the president, Michael Young, or with the experimenter, Joe Cornegay?
We have requested meetings from all of the officials. The chancellor was kind enough to let us know that he won't be in town, which is to say his assistant let us know that that was the case. We received an outright refusal from the dean of the veterinary school, Dean Eleanor Green. President Young has been quiet, and the chair of the animal experimentation oversight committee has also been silent, which has been their MO up to this point, to basically try to ignore us when they weren't spewing misrepresentations of the experiments. But we'll be there on campus, so we will very politely make our way there and attempt to engage in positive discussions with them.
Now, before I let you go, Alka, you mentioned a dog that you were very close to, and during these conversations, I always like to ask people if there was a companion animal or something that some being that that is always in your heart when things get tough and you have to soldier on, or that remains an inspiration to you. And I just wanted to ask you, because this is tough work. I mean, you see how logical it should be, and yet you see very smart people stand up and, are intransigent and, defend a system that is almost indefensible. And during those kind of times, is there like a spirit animal that you adopt, that you go to, that makes you strong?
Well, yeah, I did mention our dog growing up. Her name was Jenny. And as I said, she was my best friend. And I don't want to suggest that my parents didn't love me unconditionally or don't love me unconditionally. But you're a parent, so you know how these things are.
Yeah. And I had a dog named Jenny too. So
Oh,
I know
really?
how good Jenny dogs are. Yeah.
Yeah, she was my heart. And, she was definitely a big part of my understanding animal rights and the notion that animals have interests and should be left alone, that they have their own way to make in the world and shouldn't be serving our agendas. So she was a big part of that. But when I think of what you're asking, a spirit animal, I think about, I worked on a case that PETA, an eyewitness investigation that PETA conducted. This is some years ago, back in 2004, 2005, of a facility called Covance. Covance is one of the world's largest contract testing laboratories. They use hundreds of thousands of animals every single year in horrible toxicity tests, poisoning tests on animals. And they use dogs, monkeys, rabbits, really the whole, Noah's Ark of animals. It's a horrible company, has been in violation of very minimal federal animal welfare regulations and guidelines through its history. But we did an eyewitness investigation where our person had been hired as a primate technician. So she cleaned the monkeys' cages and gave them food, water, that sort of thing. And of course, videotaped while she was there. So my job was to look through her notes and look through the video footage that she captured and identify where there were violations of federal law. And it actually, when this happened, my supervisor at the time had handed me a big stack of papers, which were the log notes. And she said, why don't you go through and highlight everywhere that you see violations of law? And I started doing this and I thought, wow, I could just highlight the whole thing. But watching the video, you would watch these monkeys being gavaged. That means that a very thick plastic tube, inflexible, is being thrust down the throat into the stomach or up the nostril into the stomach of the animal to pump in the experimental drug. These monkeys would get sicker and sicker and eventually die or be killed. And on top of that, which was just the baseline experiments being conducted by Covance, the workers were really awful people who would take out whatever issues they might have on the monkeys. These are small monkeys, and the workers would beat the monkeys, throw them into their cages, shake them, hurl curses at them. And so this was going on. And so this comes to my spirit animal. There was a worker who was particularly violent with these small monkeys. And he had removed a monkey from the cage and was getting ready to beat her. And he was standing next to a bank of cages, these metal, horrible enclosures. And there was a little monkey. She was probably about 2 years old, just a small monkey in the cage. And she was reaching out her little hand and trying to yank at the technician's lab coat to stop him from beating the monkey who occupied the cage next to hers. And, I'd been watching hours of this video footage and it was already horrible. And seeing that, I just broke down because this was a monkey who was living in a steel enclosure, barely bigger than her body, totally barren, deprived of everything, a smart social being living in this absolutely, a space like it's like deprived of color. The color is drained out. The oxygen is removed. And she has nothing. She's little. She's vulnerable. She's probably sick herself. And here she's doing what little she can do to help her friend. And so I think of her a lot. I think of her when we are, like we are right now, immersed in this David versus Goliath battle against the funders, the experimenters, the university establishments. I think about her and I think that she didn't pause to worry about what she didn't have or what powers, she wasn't imbued with. She just acted. And I find that incredibly inspiring.
Yeah, we're all just little monkeys tugging on the white coats, telling them to stop it. Right?
Yeah, and collectively we can do it. It's like the snowflake story, the final snowflake that breaks the branch. We are able to do that.
Yeah. And so it can be done at Texas A&M.
I believe it will be done. It's just a matter of time. And we want this to, Texas A&M University, if they're listening, they'd be well advised. Look at the past 18 months that we've been campaigning. We're not going away. We have the public behind us. We are constantly getting calls from people who are shocked to learn what's going on. People are really upset. We're putting pressure everywhere. We're taking advantage of every pressure point. And we are creative. We've got grit and we will prevail.
Dr. Alka Chandna, Chief of Laboratory Case Management, Laboratory Investigations Department at PETA. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Emil. It was a pleasure.
And good luck at Texas A&M.
Thank you again.
Dr. Alka Chandna on the research using dogs at Texas A&M. Chandna is Chief of Laboratory Case Management, Laboratory Investigations Department at PETA, and she talked about the horrors of how A&M breeds dogs to suffer for science. You can check out the video of those experiments. The links are on our podcast page. And for more information, contact us at PETA.org. Once again, thank you for listening. Don't forget to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. It will help us reach more people and let them know why it's important to speak out and take action for the animals. Our music is provided by Carbonworks. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo. Mimi Bekshi, Director of International Programs at PETA UK, on the world's largest dog show, Crufts, how PETA disrupted the show and ignited a conversation about the horrors of dog breeding. For more information, you can contact us at PETA.org. Once again, thank you for listening. Don't forget to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. It'll help us reach more people and let them know why it's important to speak out and take action for the animals. Our music is provided by Carbonworks. Check them out on YouTube. I'm Emil Guillermo.